We are starting off the first of our live streamings with Anshika Varma, a photographer, artist, curator, publisher, and educator, among other things. We will be in conversation with her regarding this GUFTGU zine that's been published by Offset Projects. And while she will be introducing herself in her own words, I would like her to start off, she would be starting off the conversation by locating this particular publication series in her larger kind of collective engagement platform of the GUFTGU talk series, and how the talk series has also evolved from a physical space to a virtual space due to the pandemic, the Now On grant by Pro Helvetia that's come in during this period of the pandemic, and how this particular 10 artists have been chosen out of a larger pool of conversations and a community that she's been building around bookmaking, photography, memory, identity, etc. And I'm going to do something slightly funny now because we are rather serious about social distancing. I'm going to leave this chair and she's going to come in, and I'm going to be a voice here on from behind.
Thank you for that, Sanjuti, the voice of our talk today. I think Sanjuti has been very, very generous with her words for me already and has kind of made many descriptions for the kind of work that I do. But I think what may be nice is to start with the GUFTGU, the idea of GUFTGU itself. And, it's for those of you who might be joining us from different regions and might not know of the word or might not have heard it previously, GUFTGU is an Urdu word that actually means conversations. And for anyone who might know me even briefly, they do know I obsess about talking all the time. So GUFTGU was actually something that, there was a phrase that I grew up with when I was very young, and my grandfather used to say, "GUFTGU jari rahe," and which translates again into the conversations shall always continue. And his idea behind that was that there might be ideas and concepts and principles that you agree with or disagree with, but the only way to make sense of them is to keep talking about it, to not have that interrupt. And for me, I think I've always held that very, very dearly, even within my own photographic practice, and even in giving birth to Offset in that sense, because the idea was how do we converse about photography, and how can photography lead to conversations about so many other things. The GUFTGU program that Sanjuti very briefly did mention has changed avatars and forms over the very few years that we have been in existence. We used to have physical conversations followed by, as part of reading rooms, as part of discussions around photo books when we were in a physical space. And we did have certain programming. We were very confident about certain programming last year before, of course, the pandemic hit us all. And, we had to kind of reorient and restructure ourselves. One of the things that, Offset had always started with the idea of working within academia, working within schools, universities, and to take photography outside of photographers, as I have often mentioned. And, during the pandemic, schools and universities, specifically, art educational institutions were going through a very tough time. The students were obviously going through a much tougher time, and that, conversations with them led me to kind of think of ways in which we could help, by having artists come on board, by having conversations with artists where they could talk about their own process within photography. It was maybe not as much about their work as it was about the internal space from which work emerges. And for the last 2 years, we've actually been working on this idea of a GUFTGU Zine Box, and the zine has been somewhat of a fascination for me as well. And we'd been planning and prepping on this since May, I think, yeah, since May last year. And in October we received a now on call grant from Progalvitsia, New Delhi, which was amazing because suddenly all these dreams in my own experimental lab in my brain suddenly could manifest themselves into more, well, tangible things as we have here. And here we are with the GUFTGU Zine Box.
I wanted to just ask that why did you choose zine as the medium of this kind of thing? Why not? Also because this idea for making this zine had already been there before things went virtual, before you received the grant, etc.
Right.
And what sort of physical event had you imagined, and how has that transformed?
Absolutely. Okay. So I think zines for me, zines of course have their own extremely important history in being voices of underground resistance movements. I am in no way claiming that we are doing that, but I think what was important for me was that what it offers is a way in which the work that you create, if you're the artist or the photographer, making a zine, or the work that you receive if you are the reader, it kind of moves away the sacredness of it. It becomes something that you want to open and you want to play with, and you feel that there's an ownership that comes in a very different form as opposed to a book. Also, I think that if you are to see the kind of diversity of voices that we do have in the region right now, there are also these really beautiful, quiet bodies of work that do exist, which might not have the volume or the financial capacity to be made into a book, but they do actually, the voices of the authors of these works, for me, really felt that they could be manifested in zines. Along with that, what was also important for me was that the form should not dictate how one reads the work. And what ends up happening, in book forms, I feel, where multiple artists are represented at the same time, is that you have to standardize a book size, you have to standardize a certain kind of paper, you have to standardize a certain form of navigation, for very practical reasons. But somewhere I feel like what begins to then happen is that the book becomes more important than the artist. And I do want that when readers go through these zines, that they can hold each one, and that can be an intimate moment between that work and that author and their reader, and just the very simple act of just putting that zine aside and choosing to pick up the next allows, I think, a different form of a relationship that can then exist, with the reader for each of the zines and the works that we have created. And I think that's very important for me in creating this object. Box, zine. We're still trying to make sense of it.
And you are distributing this currently only to schools and universities, you said.
Yes.
And what are you exactly hoping to achieve with this zine and the audience it reaches? And especially now that schools and universities are also kind of virtual and slowly opening up, maybe. So what is the exact kind of plan in the near future?
So the first edition of these of the Zine Box was actually made specifically for educational institutions. Why I'm saying educational institutions is because that does include schools and universities, but also larger libraries that do exist in different cities. For me, it was very important that we're thinking about, when you said that schools and universities are virtual, and they are so. But I'm a bit of a believer on this. I think that that at some point of time, schools will begin to have, they will begin to get populated again, whether formats change or not. And the library, I think, is a really important part of a school and a university experience, because you just walk in there and you kind of let these shelves intrigue you in some ways. And so the idea was for the schools and universities to have these books in their libraries, for other educational institutions as well to have these in their libraries, and not just for them to be passive objects in the library, but we're also in conversation with particular teachers and heads of departments to see how we can create certain programming around the zine box itself. What I'm hoping for is, like for me, photography has never been the end to itself. Photography has always been the start of something. It's just that point where you begin to have a conversation, you begin to question, you begin to look at the world around you in a different way, and that's something that everyone should have access to. It could be a girl going through her first menstrual cycle and kind of having questions of her own, to be a part of a conversation that Uma Bist is having in this zine, when she talks about her sense of isolation during her first menstrual cycle and what that did to her, and how that has made her question society and social structures in a very different way. It could be someone like Jai Singh's work, who's a photographer from Tamil Nadu, and he talks about the first time that he traveled out to work with the Narmada Bachao Andolan, and how being in different states at the same point of time, he could connect with the people, because what he could see is the exploitation of people against people who have power. And these are very important conversations I feel that we do need to have. And I feel that with photography, what's interesting is that it doesn't tell you this is right and this is wrong. It shows you something, and it allows that space for a reader to respond to it, to react to that image or to react to that story, and make sense of it for themselves. For the reader also to not be passively sitting and kind of just being spoon-fed information, but like I said, it's the starting point. So you see that, and then it's your job as a reader also to say, where do I stand in this? What do I feel about this? And we've actually also started with doing these workshops with pop-up libraries in schools, universities as well. So we've seen these responses emerge. We've seen questions on sexuality, on gender, on social structures, emerge out of books that do address them. And so I feel there is a great potential for that, to continue in our institutions.
On that note, I was thinking maybe it would be nice to start looking at the zines a little bit.
Yes, I think that would be quite nice.
Yeah, and if you wanted to kind of take us through each one in just a few words, explain the background of the work, kind of locate them in the context of the subject of the work that the artist is addressing, etc. And also, if you wanted to, in this process, talk about a little bit about the other artists that you've had this GUFTGU talks with, and if you have plans for making more of these zines in the future with the rest of them.
We have many plans. The people, when they ask me, so what is offset? And I just say it's a lab. Every day we come there and we figure out what do we want to do next. So this zine actually, we've been working on an offset edition of this as well, which would be slightly different. We have certain modifications that are coming into the larger zine, let's just say. And hopefully this will be a continued publication over the years to come, and every new issue, I would not like to say issue, because I'd like to believe that the form can keep changing. That's the amazing thing about photography. We don't know what it will be till we have the works, until we know what the works need to be. So for this particular form, we felt that this is what was right, and I've had an amazing team that has helped me bring this, to realization. I'll just quickly kind of open this out for you. There's a little, our designer Ananya had decided to put this for library shelves. Maybe I'll sit here. To put this for library shelves where you can kind of drag it out. And the box reveals itself with the names of the artist and the great team that I've had who've dealt with my many desires for many changes. And then we come down to obviously the core of it all, which is a set of 9 zines that we do have. I'm just going to open them out. We also have access to, there's a QR code as you can see over here, and if you kind of use your phone to access these, it will take you to our YouTube channel that will have all the conversations we've had from May till December last year. So that's the packaging, let's just say, for it. But then we have some really amazing artists and photographers from South Asia, but also from South Asian diaspora, who have very generously contributed their images and their time and their words for us. Maybe what I can do is quickly take you through, I mean, each of these zines has been designed keeping in mind the conversation that we had with the artist, So Arun's work, which actually looks at this idea of urban mountains, talks about a landscape of, that he grew up with when he was very young in his village in Kerala. And how when he moved to the city, it seemed like the mountains were following him, but yet these were kind of the urban mountains and the dump yards of different cities that he had been in. So because he spoke about this environment of being surrounded by the mountains, we actually decided to make his zine an accordion that you can actually surround yourself with. I'm pretty certain I'm going to go out of the frame if I open this beyond here. But so there is that, and I'm going to move a little bit. You guys might not see my face, but it's okay, you can see the works. We have Divas, who's actually written a special piece from us. Divas is a curator and works with the Nepal Picture Library as well. And he works a lot with family albums and archives, historical archives, in the retelling of people's histories. And so what he's actually done very generously is, from the feminist memory project that Nepal Picture Library runs, he's shown us some images of private family albums, but we actually see them through the perspective of an archivist. So it's kind of like a stream of consciousness that runs through which, you place yourself in the feet or the chair of this archivist, and you see images through his eyes. Cheryl and Nandita actually have created very beautiful zines for us. Cheryl's work deals with an acceptance of identity using, her own personal trauma from her life, and also archival images that she has then screen printed on and typed over. And I think I might not reveal too much, because for me what was very interesting was that over here the text almost becomes photographic, whereas in Nandita's case you literally do not need any text, because she has, it's definitely something that I look at and I draw many connections to this work in terms of finding identity and just finding yourself and being with yourself in that sense. We do have Uma, whose work I had mentioned previously, and in Uma's case we talk about, there are 2 zines that have been put together into one. So we do have a zine here which will then open out and reveal a second body of work here as well. Thank you for that, Ram. We're all making sense of this as we go along. We have Adira and Amar, who had a conversation about acts of seeing. And what we've tried to do, what our designer Ananya Ketan has actually tried to do, is to incorporate that sense of GUFTGU even in the layout of the work. and I'm quite kicked about that, I have to say. We have Jai Singh's work, which is one of the first bodies of work that he had made, which is looking at, you know, the people and the villages around the Narmada Dam, but also trying to remember and draw from his own experience of isolation and his own experience of discrimination, and looking at the women who were kind of the driving force, you know, to look for equality and to ask for justice. We have another artist whose name we've put as Noon Meme right now, which talks about the kind of the discrimination on minority communities in Pakistan. And we've actually mixed her images with historical archives found in newspapers that were part of her research, actually. So to also talk about how very often process can also be your work in many ways.
I wanted to ask about that one, that who are they? Since
the community,
the artist Noon Meme.
Well, so Noon Meme is an artist who works in Pakistan, and she, well, they belong to a minority community that goes through a fair amount of, I'd say, not just discrimination but persecution very often. And there is, you know, if you go through, when you have access to the zines by yourself, if you'll go to the archives, we've actually spoken a lot about the kind of violence that exists against the community. Legally, they're not allowed to claim their religion, and that often creates this, you know, it's an identity of yours that you can never lay claim to. And what the trauma of that is, I cannot even begin to imagine. But the artist has decided to speak about this, which I think is a very brave act in itself. And the artist has also given us permission to publish the work, which you know, becomes, it's a great responsibility for us. And I think when you go through the zine, you'll get a sense of the kinds of discrimination that happen both at state level, but also personally, individually, what it means for one's sense of self, understanding the self and self-worth is something that's maybe, you know, a much more complex idea to see.
And the name you have used is chosen by you or the artist, only because if someone goes to look this person up.
The name is not the artist's name, but it's a name that the artist has chosen. We were keen to protect their identity, and you know, it's very different, and this is things that we're also, as of said, realizing as, you know, while publishing this, was that there is a great deal of responsibility. It's you know, we've been working mostly on a virtual format where, you know, you can always kind of remove material, but once you make a tangible, you know, object, then it's tough for that to leave. So that's something that we were very, very aware of, and in consultation with the artist, this name had come into being. The last of the zines that we have for this is actually Arko Datto's work on dinos of Hindustan, which is, I mean, we wanted to talk about the multiplication of images. So we do have Arko's images over here, but I might need a table for it later, but you know, the images keep multiplying as well. And because I'm certain we're running out of time right now, I'm just going to very quickly tell you the two elements that go into this work, which is that you have a set of images over here, but this also opens out into, and hopefully you can see both these sides. Maybe I can take a step back and that might help us. So this is actually, give me a moment while I make sense of how to show this to you. But yeah, so on one side of this zine is a collection of Arko's images, and on the other side we actually had Arko write out a manifesto for the Institute for Contemporary Dinosaur Studies. So you do have the manifesto as well. And you can choose to keep it as a zine. You can choose to, make it a manifesto, whatever might seem right to you at a particular point of time. So there is this version, but then there is also this other version of what you can choose to do. And I think what was important for us was that when people do see the zine, that it's something they can play with, it's not something that they have to kind of fear as this serious object, but it's something that's more interactive and playful, hopefully. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. We are really excited that we got to start this series with you.